Hello and welcome back to IllumiNation, the Disney Lorcana podcast. My name is Max.
And I'm Sam.
And we are back this episode 57 to be exact. And we are talking about kind of two things at one time. First and foremost, Sam, the team captain of Team IllumiNation, had an insanely good run going into day 2 of the Ink Inc CCQ down in Maryland, Sam. Yay.
Yeah.
You got into day 2, which means that you were top 16. What place were you in going into day 2?
I was the 3rd seed and undefeated.
You were undefeated and therefore the 3rd seed. So one player who probably had one loss managed to get their 8th win and jump you and Michael Ferrante, who was also the other undefeated player of day 1.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting. What were you playing?
Amethyst Steel.
Amethyst Steel. You always play Amethyst Steel.
Well, sometimes.
That's your number 2.
It's a come and go.
Yeah. It's number 2 after good old Ruby Amethyst.
Yes.
You had a really good run. We're going to talk about kind of in tandem with the event and kind of how Sam prepared. We thought about things and evolved the deck choice and thought about the meta in tandem with the concept that, of course, has been circulating like wildfire through the Lorcana community, and that is the B word, the banning a card. So, Sam, what does it mean when we ban a card?
You're no longer allowed to play the card in Core Constructed.
Yes, if the format calls for a ban, that card is no longer allowed to be played within that format. So if there was a card banned in Core Constructed, that card would not be able to be played in Core Constructed. We did see this semi-recently with the banning of Hiram Flaversam Toymaker and Fortisphere in what was, at that time, just the format, which is now Core Constructed. Those two cards meant they were no longer allowed to be played in that format. So now if a card is banned in Core Constructed, there is a chance it could still be playable in Infinity. If a card is banned in Infinity, there is a chance it could maybe be played in Core Constructed. That'd be weird, but it's possible. You never know if some quirky little card gets banned that creates a combo, but without those other pieces is otherwise fine. If a card is banned, it is not allowed to be played in any number within the format that it is banned. We've seen this before. It's not new to Lorcana, but is it the best thing to be doing? Other games do different things. There is ideas of like errating a card. They tried that in Lorcana, and I think that's probably the worst possible method. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they'll be doing that again.
Yeah, they did this with Bucky. It was a really strange choice to try to like patch a physical card game. It's just strange to open up a pack of Rise of the Floodborn, see that Bucky's in there, try to play him, to have your friend go, hey, by the way, that's not how the card works, even though that's exactly what the card says. And most card games, rule 1 is that the card supersedes the rules, right? Like, you can play any number of this card in your deck, or things like that. The Dalmatian puppies, you play 99 copies of them in your deck. They break the rules, so you use the card that's breaking the rules as the default correct thing. In this case, the weird case where that is superseded by the errated card text. Another thing a lot of other games try is the idea of restricting certain cards. With a restriction, a little bit different than a ban, a restriction would be you are able to play the card, but in a generally lower number than the allotted amount in a game. So usually it's 4, and if a card is restricted, it's typically restricted to 1 copy. So we've seen this. You see this in Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic the Gathering does this in specific formats. It's doable, but it seems a little weird to try to be like, you can play it, but play 1. Especially in Lorcana, there's not a lot of cards where it's like, I could see that still being good enough or powerful enough that 1 copy would be warranted, while still maintaining the integrity of whatever the deck is trying to accomplish. Like, I don't think you could restrict Hiram Flaversam to 1 copy in Infinity and then still have the Sapphire decks function on the same axis that they're functioning.
I agree. The only way that would make sense would be like if we had search cards, I guess.
Right, exactly. You get around some of these restricted cards by playing cards that let you draw a lot of extra cards at a rapid rate, which Lorcana doesn't do as much, and or search your deck for a specific card, which Lorcana does in very minuscule numbers. I don't think restrictions is right. Errata was definitely one of the roughest ways to go about it, so I do think banning cards is probably the cleanest answer to dealing with it. Also, bans are generally temporary, or the idea is temporary. It could be unbanned down the road. They could reprint a card that was banned now in 5 years and go, you know what? The game has evolved enough that this card is no longer an issue.
Right.
So we're going to reprint it and it's not going to be nearly as strong as it was. So that's very possible too. So moving into the idea of these kinds of bans, why they're good, why they're bad, is I think the next thing you should be thinking about when we're talking about banning a card. Banning a card is good because it opens up a metagame. It generally will take a boogie man or boogie card out of the format, which allows for more of a variety to be introduced in the format to prevent a particular metagame from becoming stale. Generally, you'll see bans more often when there is like a tier 0 deck that just beats everything than you will in the current climate that we are in right now, which is more of like a rock, paper, scissors kind of meta, 3 big format pillars kind of holding everything up. But why are bans bad? On the other side of that coin, there's a couple of reasons. If I'm invested financially in this game and the deck I'm playing gets banned, well, maybe I can't afford to build a new deck. So I'm either playing a deck that is not nearly as good or may not be playable at all, or I have to try to figure out how to build a budget other deck, and that can be tricky. Not everybody has the financial means to do that. Bans can also be bad because it shakes player confidence. The game hinges on us buying cards. If we're worried that we're going to buy cards and they're going to become banned, players' natural reactions are going to be to buy less cards, which means that sales go down, which means the card game gets supported less, which you can see where I'm going with this. It can lead to games no longer existing because poor game design has run rampant. I do not think that is the case with this game at all. I think the game design is excellent. I think every now and again you're going to need to push boundaries somewhere, and you're going to push a boundary a little too far, and you're going to go, uh-oh. I think that probably a little too good. That does a little too much for a little too little. Typically is what the cards we end up seeing banned are, right? Speaking of Hiram, that card generally within coming into play and questing once was typically drawing you 4 cards. That's quite a few, even though you did lose some cards along the way.
Well, I do think also like the thing that really set Hiram over the edge was the introduction of Tamatoa 6.
Yes, the 6-drop Tamatoa made the deck extremely redundant and very, very efficient. So it's just able to run kind of roughshod all over everything because it just was a fantastic little engine. And I think that we're starting to see the introduction of an engine of that similar fashion starting to evolve into the metagame now, and we'll start to touch on this here in a minute, and this is going to dovetail back into Sam at the CCQ, so don't worry, I've thought all this out. So the real big question, I think now, kind of looking at bans, for those of you who are not maybe the most familiar with them, is that we need a ban. Banning a card because you don't like it or because it beats your deck that you're playing or, a deck you really like is not a valid reason for a ban. A ban would come about when a card or cards generally end up being so difficult for the format to get over or to do anything different than that these are the decks we're seeing perform at the highest numbers. They just generally make other deck choices and other card choices invalid because what they're doing is so inherently powerful and generally hard to disrupt. So those are the kinds of things that result in bans coming about. Do we need a ban right now? What do you think?
This is the first time in the game that I have leaned more in this direction of I think there should probably be a ban. Yeah,
so let's talk about it a little bit. So we're getting ready for the CCQ. You and I spent a lot of time with other members of the team, digitally, in person, and us pulling our hair out, screaming and yelling at each other, trying to figure out this metagame. Sam, you played, as you said before, Amethyst Steel, and I took the Amber Emerald deck, the Dogs deck, to the CCQ. And I ended up bringing the Dogs deck just because I ended up playing testing it a lot. I just became the person who I played it a little bit at the end of last set. I dabbled with it here and there. I've always kind of had it built and tucked aside. Would play with it here and there and be like, this deck is really, it's difficult, confusing, it's intimidating to jump into and understand the lines, the altering. Everything's different for every deck you're playing against. The deck has a lot of nuances. Then with Winterspell, we had the addition of Grandmother Willow and Nani, which made the deck much easier to execute on its game plan. So it was much less complicated. Still complicated. I don't want to take anything away from the players who play this deck efficiently. With these 2 new cards being added to the deck, it made the deck fire on a lot different of an axis where it was much more consistent and it was much easier to do things that you needed to do with less resources. So I ended up testing this deck so much that kind of by default, I was like, I think I've actually accidentally put the most reps in with this deck. And so I took that deck and we talked about this deck a lot. And the reason why Sam ended up running the Amethyst Steel list that she ended up on is because it had the best game into not only dogs, but also into Blurple, which was generally the hardest matchup for the deck.
Yeah.
So what did you put in to help with the Blurple matchup?
For the Blurple matchup, I put in the more aggressive cards, such as Christopher Robin, Pocahontas, and then the Lilo all bundled up. I also had Nani, which is the 1/4 that quests for 2 if there's no damage on her.
The Steel Nani.
And even the new genie, which I don't remember his...
Magical Researcher.
The other card in there is Lexington, because it's just so powerful against Blurple.
So that means that you removed other cards, things like Calhoun and Staples from the other side, but you removed a lot of the evasives out of this deck. You even stripped down on the number of Genie 4s.
Yeah, I was only playing 2 Genie 4s.
Yeah, Genie Wish Fulfilled, and you were only playing 2, which has been a long time since anyone has not wrote a 4 next to that card.
Yeah, I believe I had 5 evasives in the deck, 3 Elsas and 2 Genies.
And then the Lexingtons to help with the alert, which is not evasive.
Right.
Which is extremely low. But you are using a really robust engine by replacing the Dumbos and some of the other evasives. You're using a really robust 2-card engine to help you fight against the aggressive decks. So what were those cards?
Angel.
Experiment 624.
And the cat, Cheshire Cat.
Cheshire Cat for sure. And there was another card that lets you find all these things reliably that costs 4 and is a legendary from Azurite Sea.
Yzma. Yeah, playing the 4 suite of Yzma, which made the Angel really good with the docks as well.
Right. Able to use Angel to discard redundant docks and then get your hand nice and low to either Yzma back up to the full 3, or be able to dock, draw 2, use an Angel trigger, play the other thing, and then Yzma to draw even more cards. The ability this deck had to slam things back down onto the table, even after losing a bunch of cards, is really resilient. We were testing a lot of the Sapphire Amber deck and realized that this deck ended up being a really big problem because it was just so good at putting things back onto the board even after something like a Spooky Site.
Yeah.
So it was a really tricky match for us.
The other thing that really got the engine of the Amethyst Steel deck running was playing 4 Olafs. I was able to pick up docks, pick up anything I wanted to.
Boosted cards with Genie
boosted
and
cards,
Cat.
Giant Cobras for if you're just trying to, push yourself over the edge.
Way.
Yes. Yep.
You play a Cobra, hit with Olaf, bounce a Cobra, replay a Cobra.
Yep.
That's a quick 4 lore out of nowhere.
Yeah.
This deck was the most flexible into Blurple and into dogs. So why are we talking about a ban then? If clearly we not designed, but really honed in on the deck that won the CCQ over in Leicester in the UK. That was Fia White's deck. If we really honed on that, ideated on it, came up with a game plan for dogs, which in some cases was just racing them because they didn't realize what you were doing until you just outraced them, or you attrition them out with the Angel package, and you also had this racing ability, which was very consistent against the Blurple decks because of Pocahontas and the Nani Lilo package, where you weren't having to wait and hope you drew the Timothy Q Mouse and not the Calhoun. You were just always drawing an aggressive card that could quest really effectively. So why are we talking about bans then if we were able to ideate on a deck that fit into the meta? Well, I think Purple Steel was already there. It was already kind of one of the best decks coming out of Whispers in the Well. Now, it changed, I think, because of some of the tools that it gained, especially Pocahontas. I think being one of the big cards to push it over the edge. I think that evolution made it survive to where it became more aggressively slanted. I think just about any version you look at tends to be a little bit more aggressively slanted. There are still some classically mid-range versions with Dumbos and things, but for the most part, people have adopted this more aggressive strategy to be able to race Blurple, which is traditionally the toughest matchup for them because they just don't do the cards as well as a purple deck that has 2 to 3 more ink than you do. So it's really a tricky road to navigate when they get to do everything faster. I think this deck threads the needle really well. I just am not convinced that there's another mid-range deck that can come in, be able to answer Blurple, be able to compete on the same axis as the Amethyst Steel deck, and also still be able to answer dogs succinctly. It's really difficult. There's like Sapphire Steel, that's fringy playable right now because it's kind of just like doing a bigger version of what the Amethyst Steel deck's doing.
Yeah, and I think Ruby Amethyst also does pretty well in the dogs.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think it's going to get there against the other decks.
Right, struggles into Blurple. We haven't seen it putting up consistent results too often. You can always hope to go in and dodge, but the general share of the meta at any one of these large tournaments this season has been predominantly right around like that 2/3 percentage for these three decks. So each of them sharing some range within that around 22% mark. Some a little bit more, some a little bit less, depending on the day. Even Ghent, we saw a big swing from day 1 to day 2. Again, still about the same share of the meta between the three, but different scaling depending on which deck was more popular that day. Day 2, the Saturday tournament, definitely boasting more Amethyst Steel decks to try to fight down the dogs decks.
And I do feel like even though historically the Amethyst Steel deck has a good matchup in the dogs, I think it's a lot worse now than it used to be.
I agree. I think that the addition and the use of the Amber Champion Mickey Mouse that was popularized by Sailor coming out of the very CCQ you were at really adds a layer. And we're seeing a mix now. Some people are doing 0 Chromicon. Some people are doing 1 or 2 Chromicons. Some people are doing up to 3 Mickey Mouse, Amber Champion, 0 Chromicons, which was the build Sailor was on. So there's a mixture. We've seen a step away from things like Webby to pump the strength of one of your characters and a shift to the 1-drop Rhino to shrink one of your opponent's characters to make it easier to under the sea, which we're seeing across the board in more copies, as well as 4 copies of Della's Moon Lullaby. This deck is much more now a control deck that operates very similarly, oddly enough, to the Ruby Sapphire style of playing an advantage in a way to find your cards with the Bobby kind of being like the weird parallel to Popsicle, and then you have Tramp acting as your pseudo Hiram, being able to dig you to the card that you need, and then in the late game, Lady Miss Park Avenue acting like that 6-drop Tamatoa, recurring all your little game pieces that you need to get yourself over the hump. It's just questing and playing a wide board versus playing a very tall board with just 1 or 2 very big threats. So it looks different from a viewer perspective, but in terms of operational engine underneath of the deck, they actually fire on similar axes. And we already know that Ruby Sapphire pre-rotation was one of the most popular and consistent decks in the format since Rise of the Floodborn. Seeing it come back here in this Amber Emerald shell is a concerning engine. And the Tramp 7-drop, the Street Smart Dog, I think, is really a difficult card to interact with, especially because of the Grandma Willows and the Nani's letting you play that usually and keep 2 or 3 cards, if not a little bit more in your hand, as early as turn 3 or 4 consistently. So being able to answer that while still going, okay, cool, I can definitely just play a mid-range deck. It's a Ruby deck and it's playing Grab Your Bows and Headless Horsemen and all these cool things. And then the Blurple deck comes along and goes, oh, you sweet summer child, I'm going to just beat you into the ground now. And you just can't compete because you're just like, oh crap, all my crappy mid-range cards now look terrible in comparison to all their much beefier, burlier Amethyst cards that are coming down ahead of schedule thanks to sales and T-Pos. So I think that talking about bans, it's tricky right now in this current climate because if you were to ban a card, one singular card, irrespective of what it is, a lot of people are talking about the Street Smart Dog as a ban choice. A lot of people are talking about Under the Sea as a ban choice. A lot of cards getting called for a ban that are in the dog deck specifically.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Grandmother Willows, which I don't really think is realistic considering it's a new card.
Right. And you're talking about possibly banning these cards. It could definitely loosen up the meta and it could push us more towards a tier 0 meta wherein Blurple is just going to be really good because your best aggro deck is not going to be able to beat Blurple. Blurple can still contend with the dog decks. Let's not sugarcoat it. Blurple's still putting up very convincing and still numerous results with both conversion as well as tournament entry. As we talked about, it's taking up 1/3 of that meta share. This is a big deal. And I think that talking about banning a card because it troubles you is not necessarily the right perspective. I think the best thing that you can do is in this current meta is you can look and you can go, no matter what you're going to do, even these 3 decks, look around and go, okay, one of these is going to be a bad matchup for me and one of these is going to be a good matchup for me. The problem is it's hard to break in, make one of these matches a really good, favorable match for you and not have the other 1 or 2 be less favorable because the other 2, the Amethyst Steel and the Blurple deck, or on the other side, the Amethyst Steel and the Dog dogs deck will probably prey on whatever it is you're doing. Like if you're playing, I threw it out earlier, Sapphire, Amber as a controlling deck, they have a pretty good matchup into Blurple. It's not 100%. Your matchup into Amethyst Steel is pretty solid. And then you struggle into the dogs deck. Like it's almost a 0% for you. It's really hard for you to beat. And the Blurple deck sometimes can just draw enough cards. Same with the Amethyst Steel deck. The matchup's close to 50-50 for you, maybe 55. Yeah, that's still not great. A little good, and terrible. Like that's not good enough to bring to an 8-9 round tournament and hope to be able to survive and tread water. Like you need a deck that is able to do some of these things. So we'll see. I expect that they're not going to rush this out. There's not a lot of big events on the horizon coming up until set champs, really. There might be an CCQ or two in there, depending on where in the world you are. But there's nothing gigantic that's coming up, right? There's no more DLCs. Right? The next DLC that's going to happen is going to be Infinity format, both in the European DLCs and North American DLCs. They're getting the third one, which is the Infinity one. We're not going to be talking a lot about core constructed at a very high level as much, so it might just be we're going to ride out the storm, because remember, there's going to be a rotation soon. Set 13
was that September?
September. Yeah. A year after Fabled, that September is going to be the start of the season / the new rotation. So they might just let it go. If they were to ban cards, I think they would have to really consider keeping things harmonious. I would like to see bans that don't ripple into cards that were reprinted in Fabled or exist in Whispers or in Winterspell. As much as I think Cheshire Cat is ridiculously game warping, I don't think that's necessarily a bannable card. I think that if we're going to ban cards, they should be cards that are banned in the short term. So then rotation happens and it's back to nothing's banned again. So if you were to ban something, I think Under the Sea would be a worse choice in my opinion than something like the 7-drop Tramp if you were to ban something in Dogs.
I also think a reason to not ban Under the Sea is it would also hinder the Emerald Sapphire deck. See that as a problem, so I don't think there's a reason to hurt two decks.
I agree. I think the Emerald Sapphire deck is a deck that struggled to finally get honed in and tuned and refined enough by the end of the Whispers in the Well meta that it proved to not be, while a good deck, not necessarily a boogeyman. It could definitely just fail to function and lose to itself. So it's like, that's a dangerous thing. Look at that versus the Dogs deck, where it's really, really hard to have the deck just not function. Possible, certainly, but it's much more difficult now with these new additions from Winterspells. I think it's going to be tricky, and I wanted to talk about banning just because so much of it's being hyped up right now. I think that we need to take a step back and we need to think about what a ban would entail and what could come out of a ban, because there's definitely been games I have played where cards have been banned and the meta has gotten significantly worse as a result of a ban. And I'm not to say they can't backpedal a ban, but that looks really weak. It looks like it's an uninformed choice that they made very quickly and without a lot of thought. Ravensburger taking their time when it comes to a ban is a smart thing. I know people are going to bemoan, my locals are plagued with all these dog decks and I'm getting annoyed because I lose to them all the time and it's really irking me and all I want to do is play these big battle cruisery cards. Totally understood, totally get it. Just because you like cards or you're sick of seeing cards and you wish you could play with other cards, it's just not enough reason to really push on a ban. Banning a card has such a negative impact to Ravensburger that they need to move carefully and with intention, because it does impact the ability for a new player to play. It does impact player confidence. There's a lot of things that look not great when it comes to having a ban, and there are negative impacts that a ban has. So I think taking their time, proceeding with caution is the smart thing to do. Sam, you did a great job with the CCQ.
Thank you.
So it's a tricky road to hoe, and you just have to think about it as much as you can. And as much as I love brewing up decks and trying new strategies and trying to put other things out there, and I go, man, it's very frustrating. We got all these new cards and not a lot of them are making a big impact outside of the couple that are making a gigantic impact. It can definitely get frustrating. I totally sympathize with you, but I just urge you to take some time. Don't just be one of those people who jumps on their keyboard and just yells, this card seems good. I don't like this card personally, so I think it warrants a ban. Sam, is there anything else that you want to add about bans or your CCQ run?
Not really.
Then you know what to do.
Keep questing.